Coming up on Good Morning Indian Country, public health specialist and Haskell Friends and Family groups say Trump's new bill will harm patients in Douglas County.
Changes to SNAPs poses concerns for Indian Country and may have lasting effects on Douglas County residents.
Dr. Redcorn, Chancellor of the Office of Sovereign Partnerships and Indigenous Initiatives, sat down to talk with us about the grant to support future Indigenous educators. Those stories and more just ahead. Stay with us.
Welcome to Good Morning Indian Country. I'm Shia Blackcloud.
And I'm Allison Levering. We're coming to you live from our studio inside of Stafford Flint Hall at the University of Kansas.
Representatives from public health sectors and from the Haskell Friends and Family groups spoke last Thursday about the long-term health impacts of President Trump's budget bill. According to Marissa Alcantar, a policy and advocacy manager for Alliance for Health Kansas, and that around 108,000 Kansans may lose access to health insurance due to changes made to the Affordable Care Act. Rural hospitals will also face financial challenges due to changes in taxes and slower payment from government entities. Lawrence Memorial Hospital stopped accepting certain kinds of Medicare Advantage plans last year due to issues with denials and lack of patient care in emergencies. This bill will push many local residents towards these plans, which will affect their ability to receive health care locally. For Haskell students, these cuts will majorly reduce TRIO programs and health staff at Haskell, and administrative support for students will decrease.
Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, benefits are expiring due to the government shutdown and changes made in the President's Big Beautiful Bill. The SNAP rollback will disproportionately impact tribal communities, which are already food insecure. Many tribal reservations are considered food deserts, areas with little to no access to fresh produce, whole foods, and grocery stores. Approximately 25% of Native Americans receive some type of federal food assistance. In some tribal communities, participation is as high as 60 to 80%. Douglas County Food Policy Council will Live Well, Douglas County and Kansas Appleseed held a community meeting on October 23rd to discuss impending risks to residents. Around $34 million is distributed to 188,000 Kansans each month, but SNAP beneficiaries are not the only ones facing impacts. The panel spoke to effects on local initiatives such as the Lawrence Farmers Market, where most vendors accept SNAP tokens or summer EBT, which provides eligible school-aged children with food benefits over the break. Leaders at the meeting encourage residents to speak to their representatives at the state and local levels and continue to come together to support each other.
But a new initiative from KU and Haskell is going to support Indigenous schools by paying tuition and fees of future educators. We had the opportunity to sit down and talk about the grant with Dr. Alex Redcorn, Vice Chancellor of the Office of Sovereign Partnerships and Indigenous Initiatives, and learn about how this will impact Indian Country.
Welcome back to Good Morning Indian Country. Joining us now is Dr. Redcorn, a citizen of the Osage Nation, Director of Indigenous Studies at the University of Kansas, and Associate Vice Chancellor for Sovereign Partnerships and Indigenous Initiatives. Dr. Redcorn is leading a new project connecting KU and Haskell Indian Nations University, a $1.5 million effort to help train and support the next generation of Native educators. It's called the Southern Plains Indian Teaching Pathways Project, and it's designed to recruit and prepare students to teach in Native serving schools across Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. Dr. Redcorn, thank you for being here. This sounds like a major step for KU and Haskell. Can you tell us a little bit about what this project means for Native education?
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues in Native education is getting Native educators in front of Native students. And what this project helps us do is it helps us amplify those opportunities to get Native students at both Haskell and KU to get their teacher training, and it really targets students who have associate's degrees or who are paras working in these communities across these states, and trying to get them a pathway to fully certified teaching. And then it also helps support them in the first couple years of their career. And so basically elementary students, or basically students who are studying elementary education would go to Haskell Indian Nations University, where they have an elementary ed program, and then students interested in teaching at the middle or secondary level would come to KU. And total of 15 teachers, with 8 of them going to Haskell and 7 of them going to KU.
Interesting. Well, it sounds like a good deal. And you've talked about advancing tribal sovereignty through education. What does that look like in this sense?
So one of the key things, I'm trained as an educational leadership academic, and so one of the key things in ed leadership is that one of the most important things to make a school operate, or for people to actually pursue and achieve the educational goals of their institutions, the skills of the teachers and the preparedness of the teachers is one of the primary factors that drives the success of any school. And so with a lot of our communities trying to create their own language immersion schools, but also partnerships between the public schools in their communities near their reservations, there's a need to build those partnerships and also get more teachers that are trained to go deliver curriculum instruction in those schools. And so this project is entirely focused on building that technical skill set in that core, and then that way when they go into these communities and start working, they'll be much more prepared to advance the sovereign goals of tribal nations, even if they're working in those public schools.
Definitely. And right now the numbers show very few Native educators in Kansas and Oklahoma. This project, how will it help make that positive change in Indian country?
So this project alone is focused on a total of 15 teachers, and obviously that's not going to change everything immediately, but what it does is it allows Haskell and KU to also improve our partnership on the front of education. So even though it's training 15 teachers, the process of collaborating with Haskell to create this ecosystem and these systems to work together to do this teacher training, it also allows for, it expands our network, it expands our ability to recruit more teachers, it expands our ability to improve the way that we do American Indian teacher training, because quite honestly, in mainstream educator training programs, a lot of people from Indian country can go to these programs, but it doesn't necessarily mean they get a whole lot of exposure to the unique ways that education unfolds, or the unique ways to teach in Native and Indigenous communities. There's always a lot more nuance, a lot more place-based or local specific skills knowledges, cultural knowledges that are not necessarily in these mainstream programs. So the more we can connect those things in an appropriate way, the more it builds our ability to keep doing this even outside of just a grant, because so much stuff lives and dies by the grant in Indian country. So hopefully this is a jump start that creates something that we can continue to sustain even outside of the grant.
Definitely. And you're working with tribes in schools across Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. Can you share what collaboration looks like across so many communities? What has it been like building those partnerships with tribes and finding the right people to put this together?
It's building those relationships in Indian country. Building those relationships is always one of the top priorities, and we built the relationships long before a grant opportunity came up. And so a couple of ways that we've done that is, so our Kansas Advisory Council for Indigenous Education that was developed over the last few years, which is associated with our revival effort of the Kansas Association for Native American Education. Over time, we built these kind of statewide community building efforts, or we built communities kind of at the state level. And what happened is tribal nations aren't just tied to states of Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, and tribal sovereignty predates those states anyway. And so so many Native nations has traversed these boundaries long before these states ever showed up. And so tribes are very used to just working across boundaries because we have tribal citizens from all over the country in our state. But the regional relationship building that's happened has allowed us to take that next step. And basically, one of the key things was the Degiha Siouan community is the Kaw, Osage, Ponca, Omaha, Quapaw. That was actually one of the starts of this, but also we have relationships with the Potawatomis, the Prairie Band Potawatomis, and as well as the Cheyenne Arapahoes. And so it was a combination of those types of things that allowed us to kind of bring this together in a pretty easy way, in ways that it made sense. But not only that, it's not just the tribes that are in this conversation, it's the tribes and the public schools that they work well with. And so because so many tribal citizens, especially in these states, we're not a BIE heavy state or Bureau of Indian Education heavy state. And so there's not a lot of like tribal schools out there per se, where there's large Indian enrollments. There's a lot of public schools nearby these reservations that these tribes are having to build relationships with. And because they have those relationships locally, and then we have these regional relationships, that ecosystem of people, the schools serving these Native kids, the tribes nearby, and the language and cultural networks and regional collaborations that are happening, all were able to come together nicely to get this project going.
Definitely, and definitely sounds like great work, and we're so looking forward to seeing that happen. So when these students finish and become certified teachers, they'll go back and work into Native serving schools. What kind of impact do you hope that these teachers make in those communities?
I really hope they recognize that they have the opportunity to multiply their impact over generations. It's an impact multiplier because, let's say, so I was trained as a teacher. In my first year teaching, I had, it's not so much in some of the schools that, I was in a larger school, but I had 140 students every year. And so if you think about impact on 140 students year one, 140 students year two, 140 students year three, and that multiplying impact, we want them to go into these communities, and they'll, as part of the grant, they'll receive support, but in return they have to work in Native serving schools, so high density Native serving schools. So when they go in these, I hope they recognize their opportunity to leave a lasting impact for generations to come, because these kids that they're going to be working with are going to become parents, leaders in their community, and so on and so on. And so, but they can't do that unless we prepare them in a way that sets them up to be successful. And so that's why, as part of the grant, they have what's called an induction period, where we get them trained, and then they have to they have supports and ongoing professional mentorship and cultural mentorship in the first 2 years of the job. Because the research shows a lot of teachers kind of enter the profession and kind of bounce out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure that they have support, not just from a technical pedagogical teaching standpoint, but also cultural support. And we want to socialize them into the larger professional networks of Indian education. So for example, they have travel funds to go to the National Indian Education Association with this ecosystem with their peers, and then they meet people, they get to go to workshops, and they get a long-term exposure to people doing American Indian specific versions of education, because it often looks a little bit different, or a lot different than kind of quote unquote mainstream education.
Definitely, and this funding, I understand it covers things like tuition, books, even a living stipend. Why is it important to include that type of level of support in this kind of program?
Well, because there's a lot of, especially when we're talking about people who have an associate's degree, we may get students that are literally finishing up their sophomore year as an associate's, maybe at Haskell, or maybe at a different tribal college, or maybe at a community college somewhere. We may get people who have that associate's, but we also have a likelihood of getting people that they're already working adults or parents, and they're trying to go back and do a career change, or they're a para working in the school. And the amount of money and sacrifice it takes to go do school full time for a couple of years in hopes of getting your next kind of level of employment, it's a lot. And so some people just can't afford to do that. And so we have living stipends that are part of it, and we tried to put as much support for books, laptop, and things like that in the program. So living stipend, tuition, books, laptop, and that's part of that service commitment, because basically, this is one of the things of the program, if they don't finish and they don't go work in these schools for 2 years to pay back for the year, if they don't finish and they don't go work in these schools, then they do have to pay back. And so it's really important to understand, like, we need to recruit people who are very committed to the purpose of education and that career change, and we want them to be successful in that. And if they go teach for a couple years in these high-serving Native schools, they'll have it all paid for.
Wow, that sounds like a really good deal. And, me as a student, that seems like something that would really help and encourage, to become a teacher and to become looking into the realness of becoming a teacher for students. And for someone watching right now, maybe a student at Haskell or someone thinking about teaching, how can they get involved and learn more?
So we are in the process of onboarding, because this is a very recent announcement. So we're in the process of onboarding a program coordinator soon. We'll be posting a position, and then you'll start seeing advertisements. But really, for any students at Haskell that have an associate's degree, for any students out there in Indian Country that have an associate's degree, or are just finishing up an associate's degree, even next spring, we're going to start recruiting and trying to help those students start thinking about how they can possibly onboard into the program and either continue their schooling at Haskell or KU.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for having us, Dr. Redcorn. We hope to hear from you very soon and give us plenty of updates on how this partnership is going. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Sounds good. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah.
Last Friday, the University of Wisconsin Green Bay premiered a new jersey against the Kansas Jayhawks. The green and purple jerseys recognize Oneida Nation and their contributions in Northeast Wisconsin. The collaboration coincides with the National Native American Heritage Month in November and was created by 21-year-old Jocelyn Matoxen. Every piece of the design, from the colors to the words to the artistic elements, is purposeful. The color purple is significant to the Oneida as a reference to the wampum beads made from quahog shell. The lines along the bottom of the jersey represent Haudenosaunee clay pottery. The sky domes represent the way the sky over the earth protects and sustains life below. On Saturday, November 29th, the Phoenix will host Haskell at Crest Center and UWGB, and the Oneida Nation will provide an in-depth look at the meaning behind the jerseys.
Still ahead on Good Morning Indian Country, how tribes are turning golf courses into engines for economic growth and cultural pride. Plus, the Micmac in Maine are strengthening sovereignty through the land itself. Those stories and more. Stay with us.
Good Morning Indian Country is supported by Press Forward, the nationwide initiative strengthening communities through local news.
Welcome back. Tribes across the country are turning golf courses into more than just places to play. They're building economic strength and celebrating cultural connection. ICT News reporter Daniel Herrera Carbajal looks at how tribal nations are using golf to drive development while honoring their relationship to the land. Take a look.
Land is deeply embedded in Native cultures, and for Mark Wagner, a golf historian and author of Native Links, the game of golf is also about land.
Land is key. Like, the game of golf requires the most amount of land of any game in human history, right? Like, an 18-hole course requires roughly 250 acres. And in Native culture, land is everything, right? I mean, land is, one of the ethics of Native culture is, the land is going to outlive us, right? We are, the earth is our mother, right? So I think that there's a natural kind of ethic there of being close to the land.
While the sport is often associated with white elitism and criticized as a, quote, rich man's game, Native people have embraced the sport since Oscar Smith won, played in the U.S. Open golf tournaments in 1896 and 1899.
Some Native golfers who really succeeded, Althea Gibson, Joe Lewis, Orville Moody, they weren't identified as Native, right, because of the history of loss of culture, the history of the white press not acknowledging Native culture, and so on and so forth. So my book is an attempt to try and address that and identify Native contributions to the game. And, like the Orville Moody story is tremendous. He was full-blooded Choctaw, but he had joined the Army and they identified him as Sarge, right? When he won the 1969 U.S. Open, which was the 69th U.S. Open, interestingly enough, Choctaw Nation held like a big celebration for him. They gave him an eagle headdress. They had a parade. His mother was in the convertible, and but the press didn't acknowledge that at all. So my book is trying to kind of correct some of those misperceptions.
This long history of native golf took a turn in the 1970s and 1980s when tribes, aided by the revenues from gaming and fee to trust programs, began to develop their own golf courses on tribal lands.
Beginning in the early 1990s, native tribes began to build golf courses on reservations, and that has created a culture of golfers and golf tourism.
The Mescalero Apache started things off with the Inn of the Mountain Gods in 1975. The golf courses that followed have combined the economic visions of the tribes with renowned course designers and players. One of the most economically successful tribes in America, the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community of Minnesota, added golf to their holdings in 2002 when they purchased Lone Pine Country Club. The course was remodeled by architects Garrett Pill and Paul Miller and reopened in late summer 2005 as the Meadows at Mystic Lake. The facility has since drawn numerous awards and recognitions. While native reservations were not picked for their abundant resources and prime real estate, Wagner says tribal nations still look to be good stewards of the land when designing and constructing golf courses.
I think that native people come at it from, we're not just going to bring in bulldozers, we're going to talk to the land, we're going to talk to the great spirits, however you define that, and say, hey, we're going to put in a golf course, but we're not going to disturb the cultural artifacts that might be there, any graveyards that might be there. So I think there's a real accent on honoring the ancestry of who was there before. So, for example, Nota Begay is brought in as a cultural consultant a lot of times. And they'll say, how should we work this land? What can we do to preserve any artifacts or other things there, preserve the native spirit of the land? So I think it's really principle number one, as far as the tribes come at it from that perspective of honoring the land, stewarding the land, and water, big issue, right? To not use pesticides in places, to honor the earth by sustainable practice, using less water. All of these things are part of native golf culture.
Looking ahead, golf courses are being seen by many tribes as an economic engine that can complement other aspects of a tourism economy.
Golf, believe it or not, not only gaming, which began in 1988, but now golf is driving that economy on native land. Now, it's complicated, right? I'm not an advocate for, golf being the way that tribes come back,
In Maine, the Micmac tribe is deepening its connection to the land through farming, hunting, and traditional practices to strengthen sovereignty and self-determination. ICT News reporter Stuart Huntington takes a look at how the return to the land is also a return to identity.
It started as a hardscrabble community vegetable patch a generation ago in northwestern Maine. Then it moved to some tribal land up the road.
We had just acquired this property here in Caribou, and our council at the time decided that it would be a great place for us to have and start maybe a small farm. And that started for 4 acres for a good 10 or so years.
Today, using grants, grit, and forethought, the enterprise has flourished.
We've really grown by leaps and jumps, and now we're planting 30 acres.
With greenhouses and even chickens.
We have a small orchard, apple orchard. We have high bush blueberries, and then we do some melons, and we do a huge variety of vegetables.
And fish. The Mi'kmaq are fish people, but pollution in area waterways meant humans had to limit fish consumption to
1 fish a month. And for our culture, that wasn't going to be sufficient. It's a primary protein for the Mi'kmaq Nation is fish. And so we said, well, maybe if we can't fish, then maybe we should grow our own fish.
A decade ago, the tribe installed a 3,000 square foot brook trout hatchery, adding protein to the produce, inching toward food sovereignty.
So all of these guys throughout here are about 12 to 16 inches long. We have a couple of 3-pounders in here, so a really couple big ones, so these are our harvestable fish. These are the ones that the
But just wait till next year.
Right outside adjacent is where our new hatchery is going to be.
It's under construction today on the Micmac Farms property. The new hatchery will quadruple the tribe's trout production.
With our current setup right now, I have to grow them a little slower than I could, just because of the room and space inside the 2 tanks that we do have. With the new hatchery, it goes from 3,000 square feet to 9,000 square feet in a new hatchery, so it triples our space.
And their production, and their ability to serve the people. MicMac Farms provides tribal members food at no cost.
We get a grant from the government, and it allows us to provide our tribal members with what they need and the produce that they want without needing to pay for it at all.
About 85% of what we grow goes back to the community to support our food sovereignty.
And the core indigenous value of generosity. Witness the truck that loads food for 4 other Maine tribes.
The Wabanaki food truck that comes around once a month.
And then tomorrow I go to Township for the first Passamaquoddy, and then I go to Supply.
And so they'll pick up any extra fish that we have, or vegetables as well from the farm. And then they deliver to all the other tribal sites here in Maine. And so they'll drop off the fish, and then they'll pick up, maybe the Passamaquoddies might have extra blueberries. So they'll pick up blueberries there and distribute them to the other tribes and drop off things that other tribes have extra. So it's a great partnership. Working together and using each other's resources has really been a game changer for, I think, the tribes here in Maine.
Impressed? There's more. The tribe recently reestablished stewardship over more than 100 acres of woods and is opening a sawmill.
We'll have the lumberyard set up here, of course, do all the cutting here. The wood kiln will be here, and then once the wood is dry...
With an eye towards vertical integration.
So that's what's great about this project, where it's tribal citizens working on tribal land, cutting tribal wood, and then we're going to take that wood, we're going to mill it, and then build 18 new homes for tribal citizens on our tribal properties.
Call it construction sovereignty, done just the way
our ancestors would have done, and steward that land, the best way possible. We're not going to go in and clear cut anything, of course.
And you guessed it, there's even more. The supply chain disruptions from the pandemic and recent changes to federal grant policies underscored a real need for self-reliance. The place to start? Power. Today, MicMac Farms gets about half of its electricity from tribal solar panels.
It's not a huge solar farm, but it was a great place to start with.
And has plans to eventually be fully self-sufficient.
So we're looking at projects right now for more solar and battery storage. So once we're able to add on the solar and battery storage products to this, there should be no reason why we can't self-sustain. That's the dream. So 5 years. I'm hoping in 5 years that we've accomplished this.
In Wisconsin, native languages once threatened with erasure are being spoken again. Menominee and Ojibwe language keepers are leading a powerful revival. ICT follows how they're reconnecting their communities through words, culture, and identity.
Trinity Caldwell is learning how to speak Menominee, an indigenous Native American language.
The ability to talk in the language freely, that to be able to do it now today is a blessing because our elders weren't allowed that freedom.
Caldwell's Native ancestors spoke languages that are now nearly extinct. Adult language learners at the Menominee U Language Campus are on a mission to revitalize their indigenous language from a past of systematic erasure.
Like even just saying poso wasn't always the most comfortable thing right away.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't ubiquitous. I didn't really hear it a lot.
There
was no meaningful social or community access to the language.
Ron Korn Jr., Director of Revitalization for Menominee U, says their doors opened in 2024 after creating a community of Native language learners online.
That means if you're not looking to be a teacher or be a student, there was no place for you in revitalization.
The adult learners earn a stipend to normalize speaking Menominee on the reservation.
When we go and patronize any of the places here on the reservation or do our business, be it at tribal offices and or anywhere else, that we might see people who have taken their opportunity to join this revitalization and do that same business in the language.
Alexander Medina says he's now exposed to more conversational Menominee vocabulary that his non-native stepfather dissuaded him from learning as a child.
Sometimes it was kind of heavy-handed and kind of bad, and how much he didn't want us to basically just be Menominee, like use res slang. We'd get in trouble.
But now as you're learning the language, does it have an impact on your self-esteem and your identity?
Absolutely. It kind of clicked to me that it's not illegal, it's not banned anymore, so we should do what we can to salvage the culture we have left.
Language revitalization efforts stem from a troubling past.
The boarding school experience was very effective in what it set out to do, which was to kill the Indian, save the man, and every man, woman, and child. And our ancestors, 3-4 generations over, had this horrific life experience.
For over 60 years, there are at least 11 federal Indian boarding schools across Wisconsin, including 2 here in Menominee Nation in Kashina. These schools were designed to culturally assimilate Native American children into American culture by forcibly removing them from their families and banning them from speaking their native tongue.
The most common thread that you see in conversations about language loss really began in the 19th century, and it often revolves around federal Indian boarding schools and Indian schooling in non-native institutions.
Sasha Maria Suarez, professor of history and American Indigenous Studies at UW-Madison, says the federal Indian schools across the state were managed by religious institutions, which colonized Native American children and prohibited their language.
What was it to be replaced with?
English. Even if they went into federal Indian boarding schools with no grasp of the English language, that was really the only language they were permitted to speak.
Severed ties to Indigenous languages has been a generational issue for all tribal communities.
For over a century, these kinds of policies that have tried to diminish and disrupt Indigenous language use.
My great-grandma, she spoke Menominee. There were some things that were passed down and some things that weren't, and the language just was not one of them.
Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, Ojibwe, Stockbridge Munsee, and Potawatomi are some of Wisconsin's indigenous languages. Suarez says Wisconsin's indigenous languages did not completely lose their voices.
Those elders who had been to schools, who maintained an awareness of their indigenous languages, started using education to teach their languages to the next generations.
In Bad River, for a new generation of language speakers and singers, Dylan Jennings of the band Bijiki wants Ojibwe traditional sounds to be a part of the modern music scene.
We're, expressing ourselves and making things that we like, but another part of it too was using our platform to normalize our sounds, our style of singing, and our language.
Their song Unbound is about preserving Bad River waters.
We just have to remember to utilize our language and all those tools that we've been given.
And today, all federally recognized Native tribes in Wisconsin offer Indigenous language learning opportunities.
The founding of revitalization efforts in those decades following World War II demonstrates really clearly how boarding schools failed in terms of trying to dismantle and disrupt Indigenous languages.
In 2021, Governor Tony Evers issued an executive order formally apologizing for Wisconsin's role in the Indian boarding schools era. Through state and private funding, language revitalization efforts at Menominee U plan to continue.
I don't have an education beyond high school, but I have a resilient spirit that's willing to give all that it can to see through the revitalization of the language.
Up next, Millie's Got Sports with a look at how teams are celebrating Native American Heritage Month, plus updates on basketball and volleyball at Haskell Indian Nations University.
Thank you to the Henry Luce Foundation for their support of Good Morning Indian Country.
Welcome back to your weekly recap of sports all over Indian Country. I'm Millie Favela. It's Native American Heritage Month, and the NCAA has come out with some stats about our Indigenous athletes for the 2024 through 25 season. 2,364 Indigenous athletes were a part of the NCAA last season, a 35% increase from 10 years ago. The total NCAA student athlete count only increased 17%, which means Indigenous growth doubled that of overall student athletes. Just under 700 Indigenous athletes played at the D1 level, just over 900 in the D2, and just over 750 at the D3 level. The men's basketball team at Haskell Indian Nations University has been busy and has an even busier week ahead. Last week, the Fighting Indians took 2 losses, one to Ottawa University, 103-81, and the other to Benedictine College, 71-64. The team snapped their 4-game losing streak against Bethany College, 94-75, on home court on Monday. Haskell is set to host the Ernie Stevens Junior Classic alongside Four Winds University this weekend. On Thursday, both teams will kick off the Classic with a Native community basketball event, encouraging local Native youth to come together and play some ball. Despite hosting 6 teams, Haskell will only play 3. Park University at 7:30 Friday night, Four Winds University at 7:30 on Saturday evening, and Baker University at 4 on Sunday afternoon. Before the game against Four Winds, Haskell will host an alumni game and award presentation at 6 p.m. The Lady Indians basketball team kicked off their season with a ring ceremony for the 2024 through 25 CAC championship team and a win against Peru College. GMIC's Jude Gussie has more.
The Haskell Indian Nations University women's basketball team won their season opener Thursday, October 23rd, as they celebrated their 2025 Continental Athletic Conference Championship.
Yeah, it was a night filled with emotions. I mean, it's something that, the night began with kind of revisiting where we left off.
Last year's conference title victory granted Haskell an automatic bid to the NAIA National Tournament after defeating Northern New Mexico College 57-52 here in Lawrence, Kansas. As the team made national news with the tournament run taking place shortly after head coach Adam Strom was laid off due to federal budget cuts and continued to coach as a volunteer. The team opened their season at home with a ring ceremony before going on to defeat Peru State 74-69, making the night that much sweeter.
And I think it took me a while to get in game mode. So if the guy leading the charge is kind of taking some time, then the players are going to follow. And that's kind of what we saw. It was just tough for me to observe and coach at the same time. So I think at the end, we just made the plays we needed to play and got some open court plays, which really helped us.
Since the win on opening night, the team's record sits at 3-1 as they head on a road trip for matchups in Tulsa and San Antonio this week. For Good Morning Indian Country, I'm Jude Gussie.
We can't wait to see what the Lady Indians have in store for this upcoming season. The Haskell volleyball team headed out to Heston, Kansas to compete against Heston College in a 5-game set. The Lady Indians took the first 2 sets, but Heston came back and took the last 3, causing the ladies to fall 3-2. Haskell totaled 45 kills and 90 digs. Elena Doogie has also been crowned as the CAC's Defender of the Week for the 3rd time in her career. Doogie averages 5.6 digs per set and sits in first in the NAIA with 642 digs. The team is now 7-30 overall and 2-4 in conference play as they head out to Cotty College to close out the regular season on Saturday. That's all the sports we have for you this week, but make sure to stay tuned after the break for a roundup of some local events.
Good Morning Indian Country is supported by the University of Kansas William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communications.
Welcome back. There will be a career readiness workshop to help students prepare for internships, interviews, and future careers. You'll gain free professional headshots, guidance on how to dress for interviews, a resume review, and elevator pitch workshopping. This will happen in Tomedy Library at 3 p.m.
Also on November 6th, come join Career Services for a Veterans Day barbecue party to honor our nation's veterans. This event will be at Stidham Union from 3 to 5 p.m. This event is on Haskell's campus and open to the public.
Kansas City Art Institute will host Jadelle Visiting Artist Lecture featuring Raven Half Moon. There will be monumental clay sculptures that explore Indigenous identity, power, matriarchal lineage through a contemporary lens. This will be November 13th at 7 p.m. at Epperson Auditorium in Kansas City, Missouri.
Get Help KC is offering one-on-one support with forums, jobs, and services. You can help budgeting online, checking credit scores, finding housing support, applying for scholarships, and much more. There will be free workshops and kids' STEM activities. You can also get a free laptop on a first-come, first-served basis. Only 20 are available. Scan the QR code to pre-register, and this will be required to win the free laptop. This will happen November 8th at 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at 1801 Linwood Boulevard in Kansas City, Missouri. Thanks for watching this episode of Good Morning Indian Country. Another thank you to Press Forward, the Henry Luce Foundation, and the William Allen White School of Journalism for their support of our work.
And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Good Morning Indian Country. As always, Indian Country, stay good, and we will see you next week.
Good Morning Indian Country is supported by the University of Kansas William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communications.